Let's rewind to March 2020. My wife, Sarah, had narrowly escaped death after being in the hospital for 21 straight days. The cancer drug Keytruda had done its job. Sarah's doctor said when she returned home, she had to build up her strength again by walking each day. It took time, but Sarah slowly made it from the front door of our home to the driveway. The next day, she walked to the sidewalk. Then a few days later, walked to the neighbor's house and back. The second week, she made it halfway down the street, and then finally, after a few weeks from returning home, Sarah walked all the way to the end of the block. I was walking a few steps behind her, and as she hit the end of the street, she lifted up both of her arms straight into the air and let out a beautiful celebratory yell. I captured her reaction on my phone. I love that photo so much. It captures pure joy. In that moment, forever frozen in time. And the joy is hers and mine as well, having watched her go from near death a few weeks before to being able to walk to the end of the street on a sunny, warm day. Some might ask, how did you find joy during her 21-month war against cancer? And I would say you need to find those small pockets of joy to keep you moving forward, to savor them, and now in the present, recall them whenever you need to. Hey everyone, I'm Larry Holm, and welcome to the What About Grief podcast. In today's episode, we want to talk about how hard it can be to find and experience joy after losing a loved one, or even while you're experiencing a difficult period in your life. What is joy? How do you find it? Is joy sustainable? After a night of weeping, does joy come in the morning like it says in the Psalms? It's really amazing how three little letters, J-O-Y, spell an emotion that can have such a powerful role in our lives. Well, if you haven't figured out, joy is what we'll open up and discuss with my guest this month, Dana Frost. Dana lost her husband, Brad, to stage 4 kidney cancer in January 2017. She became a 33-year-old widow who was, as she describes in her bio, pissed, devastated, and angry. So how did she manage to turn those three very extreme emotions into a website called The Forced Joy Project? So let's find out. Dana, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. And what a beautiful introduction.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to have you. I love your website. We'll talk about that in a bit. But I always like to start out having you describe and give us kind of an idea of what Brad was all about. What was his personality? What was his makeup?
I feel like this is the hardest question to start with.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Because how do you describe a person that's not here for people who didn't know him? And Brad he was a complex human. He was so smart. He was so intelligent, but he was also so down to earth, so funny. He was the kind of person that made everyone feel like they were the most special person, like very intense in how he listened and engaged with people, how he engaged with the world. And that intensity was a quality I loved about him, but also made him difficult to be married to at times. He was ambitious. He was the kid in elementary school when asked what he wanted to be when he grew up, said he wanted to be president, and you'd meet him as an adult and be like, oh yeah, I get it. You could actually do that. So very future-oriented, and that's how we complemented each other. I was very much in the present, not having any idea what I wanted to do with my life, and felt like my role was kind of how do I support and go alongside of Brad, because he always just knew what he wanted to do and how he wanted to show up in the world.
You know, when Brad passed away, you wrote on your website that you were of the age when friends were getting promotions at work and having babies, starting families. And here you are now, a 33-year-old widow. And so what was going on through your mind? What were those first few weeks like when Brad did pass away?
Shock. I mean, I think it was a lot of shock, which maybe doesn't make sense to those who haven't experienced a loss from cancer. I think people assume you have time, that you've come to terms with it. But Brad and I, at least, very much were living in this state of we're going to be special, we're going to be unique, and we're going to beat this. And it was just very much living in the present. So once he did die, it was like something shifted in my entire brain and body of like, now this is my reality.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know how to handle that or live in that space.
And did you attend any grief groups or meet with a counselor to talk about your grief? Because everybody has an idea of how you should, get into this and deal with your emotions and talk about it. But yet, not everybody is you, and you're the only one who's going through this. So did you get involved at all, or did you hold it in for a while? What was your timetable like?
I definitely held it in for a while. As somebody who's now in the grief space, it's a little bit embarrassing to be like, yes, I wanted no help from anybody.
Yeah, right.
And when I did eventually go to a grief group, it wasn't a great experience for me. I was the youngest one by at least 4 decades. A lot of the topics I was looking for, they kind of skipped over. And so it felt even more isolating. And that's the opposite of what you want to feel when you go to a grief group.
Right.
And so it was the only one I went to for a long time and felt like if that wasn't going to be helpful, I'd have to handle it on my own. I'm also still a person that internalizes a lot, and it requires a lot of effort. Even when I know support is good and reaching out for help is good, it's not an easy thing for me to do. And I feel like that's the case for a lot of us, especially when it's something like grief, which is so personal.
Tell me the story of how Brad came up with the forced joy phrase. I think I read about it on your website while he was still alive, and then how you turned that into the name of your website.
Yeah. So we were having it was probably a couple months into his diagnosis. So he was diagnosed in October of 2016 and he died January 2017. So it was a very quick, rapid diagnosis before his death. And we were a couple months into it and we'd gotten back from the emergency room. It felt like it was one piece of bad news after the other. And we were typically really good about being on each other's side and kind of lifting each other up. And we were both just in this dark funk together. And I felt really desperate to get out of it, but I didn't know how to get out of it. And I just kind of went to him. I was like, we have to figure out a way to find joy. Like, we have to figure out a way to change this feeling, even though it was such a horrendous place for both of us to be. I didn't want that to be the only thing we were going through together. And Brad rolled his eyes and was like, you want us to force joy. And, we kind of laughed about it. And later on that day, we were taking a walk and there was music playing outside at the hotel next to where we lived. And he pulled me in and started dancing with me and turned and said, there's your forced joy. And it was just kind of that moment that made us recognize that in the middle of this horrible time, we could find, as you said in your introduction, these pockets of joy, even when life wasn't going in the direction that we wanted it to.
So how did the topic of joy, the subject of joy, become your focus then?
I think it gave me something to hold on to besides, hey, we're in the emergency room again. Hey, this is bad news. Hey, there's been more progression. The idea that we were doing that together felt really hopeful, and it gave us a different way to engage with each other, because at that point, it's a lot of caregiving. It felt like I'm responsible for medications and shots and all of these things that felt less like a partnership, like a marriage. And so for me, it gave me that hope. And I think after he died, holding on to that felt a lot more difficult, going from this project that we were doing together to something that I now had to do by myself.
Early on, after, my wife Sarah passed away, when I would go out in public, I sometimes call it, I would put on my grief mask and force a smile on my face, even though inside I was just dying and probably just wanted to be at home. But I did step out into that world, and I felt like I was, to steal your phrase, forcing joy. I'm wondering, did you kind of feel the same? Did you pretend a lot when you would venture out for the first few times after Brad passed away?
Oh my gosh, yes. I feel like friends are so well-intentioned and they encourage you to go out. They want to see you setting foot back into life again. And it felt impossible to do. And yeah, on occasion I'd be dragged out and it felt like I was completely putting up a facade, a smile on my face, everything's fine. And clearly it wasn't fine. It takes a really long time to want to engage with life again, at least for myself.
Yeah.
And maybe sometimes it was helpful. Sometimes there was real joy that came from those moments. But a lot of times, especially in the beginning, it did feel very forced. And I think by putting on that smile and not being able to talk about my grief, because everyone wants you to be okay. So you want to kind of live up to that act for them
Right.
so that they don't worry about you. But that made me feel even more isolating because then it didn't allow the space for me to talk about my grief.
And I'm just kind of curious because, after a while, people would, if I'm meeting new people, they might say, "Are you married?" And sometimes I'd say, "No, I'm single," or "I'm a widower," just kind of depending on who I was speaking with and if I was going to be with them just for a short amount of time or a long amount of time where I could get into the story a little bit. I'm wondering, how did you react to that phrase of "Are you married?" after Brad had passed away?
I mean, if it was somebody that I was never going to see again, like just polite conversation, I don't like to admit this, but I sometimes would just lie and say yes. That felt easier.
Because you were.
Right. And
Yeah.
in my mind, I was. And the idea of being single
Yeah.
did not resonate.
It hit you like a wall.
Yeah. Like being single is, I'm choosing this. I wasn't married. It felt invalidating to my relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's why the term, there's a difference in single and being a widow. The term widow gives you that weight.
Right.
You've lost your life partner, you've lost your spouse. But even that still feels awkward to say, especially as a younger person, because it stops the conversation. People are just being polite. And then it's like, oh, God, we just dropped a bomb.
Yeah. We have to go. Nice meeting you.
Right.
Oh, my gosh. I can relate. So can you kind of recall and remember the first time you experienced then kind of real, genuine joy after Brad's passing and how it might have been different between, when he was alive and now after his passing?
Yeah. So after Brad died, so we had talked about when he was sick, we wanted to buy an RV and go on the road.
Cool.
We both are writers, and we had this terrible podcast that we basically just hit record on our phone, but captured the conversations that happened along the way of his diagnosis. And so we had this dream of going on the road and interviewing other people on how they live life courageously, especially in the face of challenges. And so after he died, I didn't get an RV, but I basically wanted to honor that road trip. And frankly, I wanted to run away and escape people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd say my first real genuine joy was completely alone in a car, seeing seeing mountains and feeling awe for the first time, maybe more than joy, and having any sort of feeling that wasn't just devastation.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting and feeling that wowness of how big the world is, and then immediately feeling guilt about it. Immediately after being like, how could I feel anything but grief when Brad is dead?
Right.
And even now the joy feels different, and we're coming up on 8 years. And I don't know if that's just feeling emotions differently and holding them differently because of everything I've been through, that joy does feel a little heavier now, or if it's just, I was in my 30s, early 30s, and life felt so easy that joy felt so light before. And now it comes with so much awareness of mortality and how short life is.
Yeah.
And so it's not so simple anymore.
And I bet the first person you wanted to text or call and say, oh my God, I just saw these beautiful mountains was Brad, and you can't. And that's, to me, the biggest gut wrencher of them all.
Exactly.
Yeah. How do you describe your kind of arc, your grief journey, 8 years now after his passing?
Ooh, what a great question. I think I think that's a hard question to answer because so much of it is just you're living in it.
Yeah, daily. Yeah.
And I could look back and be like, okay, the first 2 years were just total, utter, like, I don't know what I'm doing. I can't imagine life outside of that life I pictured with Brad. I did eventually move around that 18 months to 2 year mark. I left the loft that we lived in Detroit and I moved up to Northern Michigan. And that I think helped me kind of see a different life because it was so different than the life that we had lived and that we had planned to live together. And so for the next several years, it was just trying to figure out who I was as Dana and not as Dana and Brad. And I feel like now I'm in a really beautiful relationship with somebody new. I've created this
Nice.
business that feels very purposeful. I'm really proud of the person I've become in spite of all of this loss, but also because of this loss and because of my life with Brad and the impacts that he had on me. And I don't take that for granted. Of everything I do today and have the honor of serving people in this grief space is because of Brad's influence and impact.
You're listening to the What About Grief podcast. We will get back to the conversation in a moment, but I wanted to remind you that you can write to us at the show with your thoughts, ideas, or a description of your own grief journey. We appreciate hearing from you and we like being connected with our listeners. So please reach out to us via email at whataboutgriefpod@gmail.com. Also, if you like the podcast and find it helpful, please go to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star rating. Hit the subscribe button and leave a review. All of this helps us grow the podcast and helps new listeners find the show. And share the link with those you know who are experiencing their own grief. The goal of the podcast is to help those like us navigate the confusing emotion that is grief. So Dana, you write on your website, whether you're grieving the loss of a person, a previous version of yourself, or your sanity, we get it. It's hard, but we promise joy still exists, even if it sometimes has to be forced. Life is too short to wait until tomorrow to find your joy. Besides, by then you might be dead. Life is tough. Let's force some joy. So break down that statement for us and how you might apply it to your own daily life.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just acknowledging that there are always hard things in life. Even when you think, oh, I've been through the hard thing, I'm good, right?
Mm-hmm.
Inevitably, something else is going to happen. And if we keep waiting for life to be easy, to allow ourselves to find joy, to allow ourselves to find pieces of goodness, we're going to be waiting until we're dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it really is, I know it is so much easier said than done. Like finding joy when your life is upside down, when you're in the worst moments of your life, it does feel impossible. Some days it is impossible. But I think just being open to the idea of it, that both of those things will exist at the same time, that felt really important to me, that they don't have to be separate. I don't have to wait for the grief to go away in order to be open for joy.
I'm experiencing that too. I feel like slowly I'm chipping away at some really hard things to get to that joy in certain areas of my life and kind of dealing with both the grief and the joy. And it's challenging. It's hard. It's hard work. But you have to keep moving forward, don't you?
Isn't that what our people would want?
Yes.
You know, and I think that's the thing is Brad, his life was taken way too soon. And it feels like a waste if I just sit and I know this is so different for everybody. And so I don't mean to judge anyone who's struggling or wallowing. Like I wallowed a lot.
Yeah.
But I don't want to waste my life. I don't want to not, if my time is done at the end of this day, if this is it, I want to be able to sit there and say, I did everything I could. I grasped for every positive moment, for every moment of connection, even in spite of all of the hard things that I lived through.
Well, you're doing some great things, and that's how I discovered you, and I so appreciate your website. And one of the cool things that you have on your website is a section where people can share their personal stories of grief and joy. And I'm just kind of wondering how that all came about. How did you start getting in these incredible stories?
Mm, I mean, everything I've done in my business, it's been very organic. It's all been from a place of what I wish existed when Brad died. And the first thing I did when I couldn't sleep in the middle of the night was I would Google, and I wanted people's stories, not just of the fact that they survived. I didn't just want the stories of like years out with a bow and they're remarried and life is good. I wanted to see that they'd been through something similar. It's almost like I didn't trust the end, the outcome, if I didn't get to sit in their grief with them. And there really wasn't a place at the time to read those stories unless somebody had a personal blog.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to give people a space, one, to share their story, because I think there's a lot of power and healing that comes with talking about it, whether you're writing about it or talking about it in a group setting. But also for those people that are reading it that are looking for that validation of they're doing it right, whatever that means. And so the more stories we have of like, it just shows that there is no right way to do grief. And that there is that these people, what the question I ask everyone is, how did you find joy in those low moments?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really important to see how varied the grief experience is, but also how varied the joy experience is.
Yeah.
And be able to connect to both of those.
And it's important for those people to know that they're not alone and that they have a voice and they need to share it and get it out because it will help somebody and it will help them just feel better as well, just to get it out.
Exactly. And it's amazing how many people after writing it send me another note, just being like, I had no idea how much I needed to do this for me.
Yeah.
And what comes up when you put pen to paper and just allow yourself to let your feelings go.
Yeah. Any really fun, kind of memorable favorite examples of someone who shared?
In terms of the joy?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. I mean, they're all so good. You know, what comes up a lot. Yeah. And I think that's the beauty of it. I love when it feels really personal. It can be so simple and small of, taking the time to read a book again. That's a big one where people, our mental state changes. But so many people are just like, the joy is connected to other people who make them feel seen, that sit with them in their grief. And I don't know if I would have understood that there is joy in being seen in my grief as a person, especially that really did not want to show vulnerability or, anything besides being fine. That's a really important reminder that I see from people over and over and over again of how good it feels to be witnessed and in some of those really hard moments.
So how has the website and your work on this helped your own grieving?
I think it gave me a focus, and whether that's good or bad, I don't know. It certainly helped me feel less alone to see how many people out there are going through similar situations. And now it's something, like I said, I'm coming up to 8 years since Brad was diagnosed. That'll be in a couple weeks, and then until his death, I'm at a place where I'm like, oh, where is this going to go? Because so much of it is about my own personal grief experience and how much I want to be reliving that. And how much maybe focusing on other people's grief is a coping mechanism to not deal with my own.
Right.
And I don't really have answers to that. It's, I'm now taking the time to think about what is the impact of this on others and on myself.
Yeah. Is this your full-time job now, or do you still kind of write on the side, or is this it for you?
Yeah, this is it now.
Nice.
Yeah, about 2 years ago, I walked away from the other jobs that I was doing to support this to kind of go all in. And it's not just this; it's mostly retreats, so in-person communication, and then I do memorial books for people. And so
I saw that.
There's different aspects, to what I do, but it's all the Forced Joy Project, which is really exciting. And in a dream in such a weird way.
Yeah. You talked about retreats, and that's, I believe, the Joy Scout camp retreats. Describe that and how that came up, because I think maybe you were saying that's 90% women, maybe 10% men. How did all that come up?
So Joy Scout camp, as of now, is all women.
Oh, it is? Okay.
It's my in-person retreat. And I actually have been working with a nonprofit since 2018, hosting retreats for young adults with cancer and helping them kind of build out those retreats. And so I still do several of those a year with them. And a couple years in, I was like, why don't we have this for widows? And so that's where the idea came from, of just seeing the power and the impact of putting people together in a space and feeling connected to nature. You know, it's getting them outside and having conversations in person and seeing other people that have been through the same experience. And so that's how Joy Scout Camp came up. And under the same vein, I have a Force Joy Club is my virtual membership. And that's the one that's 90% women and 10% men.
Gotcha.
And it's a way for people to connect in a safe space that's off of social media, where they can open up about their grief experience and talk with other people that have been through it. If
someone came up to you and asked how they could find joy in their life, obviously that's a massive question. But what would be like maybe the first little nugget you'd give them?
I think first, the fact that they're asking is a really good sign. It means they're open to it or wanting it. Like we've talked about so much, it's so personal that the first thing I would say is get a notebook or a notes app in your phone and make the list of all of the things you can think of. And when you're done with that list, keep that list handy. And every single time you feel a moment of joy, write it down. Because inevitably there's going to come a time where you're not going to know. You're just going to be down in it again. And it's helpful to know what brings you joy personally, because it's very different. I could be like, here are the things that make me happy and bring me joy. And none of that could resonate with you. So I think it's taking the time to really think about what brings you joy at now, not what used to bring you joy, because I think that's a hard transition and shift for people, because we assume what used to bring us joy is going to stay constant, and that's not always the case.
And when you experience that first feeling of awe and joy and probably guilt, how has the guilt part shifted? Has it gone away? Where did the scales tip on that?
I don't know if it's fully gone away. It certainly has lessened from those early days. And it's something that logically I know I don't need to feel. And so sometimes it's just telling myself that it's okay to feel joy, and reminding myself of that fact.
So I had no clue there was a National Grief Awareness Day, but it was a few weeks ago. So you wrote, Dana, a great line in a blog post a while back on your website, and it was called, "What I Wish People Knew About Grief." So can you share a couple of those, or one you feel is most important?
I think what I would want people to know that have no idea, I'll focus it on how to show up for someone and support, because those are the people that really, when we talk about National Grief Awareness Day, it's talking about awareness and how to support people who are grieving. And then I think it makes you understand a little bit more about what maybe you would need when you become a griever yourself. But I think the biggest thing is just showing up. Like, it is the most important thing you can do in spite of your own discomfort. And, it's incredibly awkward to sit with somebody when they're in the most amount of pain that they will experience and that you cannot fix it. And so I think understanding that your role is not to fix their pain, it's not to fix their grief, it's to sit with them and kind of hold space for that, because I think not a lot of people give that gift. And so that would be my biggest thing. And that comes up in these interviews over and over and over again, is just show up, just show up, just show up, and figure out how you can show up and be consistent with that.
And if you don't know what to say, don't say anything at all. Just sit there and just be with them is a beautiful gift.
Yes. Yeah. Just be present with them. Let them take the lead on what they want to say and how they want to handle it. But I would say, just to make sure, make sure you say something. If you're not showing up, don't assume you're a burden to them
Right.
by reaching out, or you're going to make them sad by randomly texting them and reminding them that this person's dead, because we remember all the time.
Yeah. It's just those awkward, like, hey, how are you doing? Right at the beginning. Don't say something like that. Again, if you don't know what to say to kind of get the conversation going, just, don't say anything at all, or ask some type of question outside of the realm of grief, maybe.
Yeah. And even if you do, we're all human. I'm still like, oh, how's it going?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that was not the good. Push through it. Keep on going.
Yeah, exactly.
And even, saying, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say to you, but I want to be here is really simple. And it's acknowledging our humanness, that we're not taught how to handle this. We're not taught how to show up for each other. But that shows that you care and that you're trying.
Let's end on a joyful note here. You said earlier you're in a relationship. Congratulations.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
How did you feel early on beginning to date again? I'm sure there was obviously some joy and some good feelings, but I got to believe there was some guilt.
Yeah, there was. It was a whole mixed bag of emotions.
Yeah, I bet.
And for me, it was just this loneliness of having a person around. I don't know if I was ready to fully let somebody into my life. And so it was just baby steps of, can I imagine holding somebody else's hand? And even that felt impossible. But once you're open to it, it's allowing those feelings. And again, it's not judging the other feelings that come with it, the guilt, the judgment, the self-judgment. But knowing I wanted, I was 33 and I wanted to at least be open to the idea of having another life partner. And I dated before. I've been with my partner now for 4 years. And so I do consider him a life partner, and we still live long distance, but our lives are very entwined and how we move through the future together. But it took a long time to get there, and a lot of work to be open to that with somebody that wasn't Brad.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. I'm happy for you both.
Thanks.
For anyone dealing with difficult times or coping with grief, have a look at Dana's website. It's a really wonderful resource, and I have spent a long time just going through it, and it's been very helpful to me, and reading those stories from others and reading Dana's words and her blog. There's community forums, there's speaker series, there's great resources to help support someone going through grief. And it's just really a great website for community, because people, Dana and others, know what you're going through. And so spend some time at that site. It's forcedjoyproject.com. And I want to close with this. On your website, you list, just maybe 10 or 15 things that, were helpful to you to help you find joy. And one of them was just cracking open in half a peppermint patty. And I could totally relate to that, because I just worked the Paris Olympics, and our production control room, all we did was eat peppermint patties. And it brought me such joy in cracking them open, and in many ways. But thank you for that. I related to that one.
Oh, I love that so much. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, my gosh. So check out Dana's website at forcedjoyproject.com. It's well worth your time to explore it. It will help you. Dana, thanks so much again for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you having me on and having this conversation.
Thank you. I want to close out this episode with a passage that I recently saw on the Momentary Happiness Instagram feed that I follow. I hope it helps you in wherever you are with your walk through life. Things can happen in this life that don't make sense. You might even ask yourself how certain things could happen to someone like you. As you navigate your way through life, it becomes clear that nothing is out of the realm of possibilities. While you can't control what life throws at you, you can control how you rebuild and rise above the moments that turn your world upside down. There is good and bad in life, and you can't let the bad hold power over the good. You are blessed in more ways than you might realize right now, and this is not the end of the road for you. There will be many more laughs and many more moments of pure joy, surrounded by the people that love you. Sometimes you need to push through the tough times to truly appreciate the good ones. Your heart may be in pieces, but this feeling will not last. Your heart will heal again in good time. But for now, it's time to be strong. It's time to accept. It's time to feel. It's time to mend. And a reminder, if you are experiencing grief, you are not alone. My thanks to Dana Frost. What About Grief is available monthly on all major podcast listening platforms. Please follow the podcast as well as rate and review the show on Apple Podcast. The executive producer of What About Grief is Marsha Anderson. Logo artwork was designed by TED Studios. This episode was recorded at BAM Studios in Chicago. And lastly, feel free to email us at whataboutgriefpod@gmail.com.